we're in Romans chapter 4. There we are. Romans chapter 14. We are looking at... There it is. Just so you know, this is where we're at. The first 11 chapters all about doctrine, and the remaining chapters from 12 to 16 all about duty. We are right in the middle of that exhortation, finding out what our duty is. Maybe it's time to get a new duty. Romans chapter 14, freedom for the weakest. I do not judge and do not destroy. Don't know what that is, but I'm sure I did that. Sorry about that. Do not judge, do not destroy. Two main divisions, okay? Let's go ahead and move on to our first one. Do not judge. The first 13 verses. Now in English. Romans 14, verse 1. Do not judge. Verse 1 says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. So we don't know exactly what he's talking about yet, but from verse 1. But verse 1, we know this, that we are to receive those who are weak in the faith. We're to accept them. We're to be receptive to them. And also, we're not to do that to dispute over doubtful things. So whatever it is that Paul is about to teach us right now, we don't know what the exact topic is, but we do know this, that there are some that are weaker in the faith, and our job is to receive them, in other words, to love them, and our job is not to argue with them and tell them how much weaker they are and how could they dare do this and do that and believe these things. We'll see what he's talking about here in just a moment. He does mention he's going to have two main subjects in this section on do not judge. Here's verse 2, begins to tell us what it's about. For one believes he may eat all things. So there are those who believe that they can eat anything.
Yeah.
Amen, right? But also in verse 2, here's the second group. But he who is weak eats... Now don't be all offended. Let me explain, okay? But he who is weak eats only vegetables. Now, do we have any vegetarians in here? Anybody proud to be a vegetarian? Anybody like you're like, yeah, I am a vegetarian. I own it. It's okay. We will love you. Okay? Nobody in here? You guys are so unhealthy.
Amen.
Okay? There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian. Okay? This thing is like really hot, huh? What Paul is saying is this. He's describing for us that there are two groups of people. One believes that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Now, here's the question that you and I want to ask. Why are we talking about eating vegetables in regards to the Bible and Christianity? Like, what does it even have to do with anything? Many of you probably are not aware of this. But there are, and you just live long enough and you'll come across them if you have not, there are individuals who believe, they're Christians, they're saved, but they believe that you should only eat a special kind of diet. And that the food that you eat will either make you more holy, closer to God, or will keep you further away from God. Now, if that sounds crazy to you, if you're thinking, what? What does it matter? What does it matter if I eat like a cheeseburger or a piece of pizza or vegetables? What difference does that make in my relationship with God? And that's, you may think that's strange because you and I, for the most part, all of us are used to that. That's just like, well, we just eat whatever we want to eat. What's the big deal? But there are individuals who think that if you eat, depending on your diet, that can affect your relationship with God. Now, you and I know that food doesn't affect your relationship with God. But there are those Christians who believe that it does. What Paul is saying here, what he's already told us in verse 1, is you're to receive those individuals. And you're not to receive them like, hey, come on over to my house, man, and come over for dinner, and then just nail them with like all the scriptures. Oh, you can eat, you shouldn't just be eating vegetables. And we're not to look down or treat them any differently or badly because of their special diet. That's what Paul's getting at. Now, for you and I, it's like, what? What are you even talking about? but there are those individuals who think that way. Okay? Now, if you're a vegetarian and you just didn't want to raise your hand because you were scared that we were going to make fun of you, we were not. Okay? When he says here in verse 2, for one believes he may eat all things, that would be the majority of us. We believe, eat whatever you want. Not a big deal. But there is this other group, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Why does he say that? That the individual who eats only vegetables is weak? What is that? Is that like you're trying to slam somebody? Like, what do you? I don't understand. You just hating on my vegetarianism? I don't understand. What's the problem? He's not saying that. What he's saying is there are individuals who think that if they only eat vegetables, that they'll be closer to God. They'll be healthier. They'll be closer to God. And what he's saying, the reason he calls these people, these individuals, weak is not because they're any less of a Christian or, they're just, they're not really, a Christian like I'm a Christian. It just means that in their faith, they do not understand yet that they have the freedom to eat anything that they want. In their mind and in their heart, they can only eat a certain thing. Because if they eat, if they go outside of their diet, then they're sinning against God. Now, you and I know. Again, we know the difference. We know that, no, it's not an issue of what you are eating. So it says in verse 3, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat. And let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. In other words, regardless of whether you are one of those, like you just eat anything, it's not a big deal, doesn't affect my relationship with God, or if you think that what your diet does affect your relationship with God, doesn't matter. Either way, both parties, both persons, both individuals need to be patient with one another, need to be receptive to one another, need to be understanding of one another. The person that only eats vegetables, a vegetarian, they ought not look down on all of us meat eaters and say, well, you guys are not, really, mature Christians. You don't really understand. Your body's the temple of God, and you don't really get that. That's not their job. Now, Paul's going to tell us why here in just a moment. Woo, baby! But Paul's going to tell us why in just a moment. But you need to understand that regardless of what a Christian may or may not eat, we don't have any business looking down on one another. Verse 4. Who are you to judge another's servant? Now, this is a great question. Here's the first reason why we shouldn't judge another Christian based on what they eat. He says, or what their diet is. He says, who are you to judge another's servant? Okay, let me ask you a question. It's a trick question. Let's say Ellie. Okay, we'll just choose Ellie. Ellie, she is a servant. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Whose servant is she? God's. Yes. She's not mine. So if Ellie only eats, if she only eats a vegetables because she believes that is going to get her closer to God, it's not my business to tell her, that is so dumb. I can't believe you think that. That's not my job. She's not my servant. My job, you know what my job is? Our job is to love one another. Like, okay, you want to eat vegetables? Whatever. Great, go for it. But also, likewise, she cannot come to me and say, well, you are so sinful because you eat meat. So, both ways, because I am God's servant. I belong to God. So, he asked the question in verse 4, who are you to judge another's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. In other words, listen, it's up to God. Like if God wants his servant only eating vegetables, then that's God's business. If God gives his servant a freedom to eat anything, that's God's business. And then he also goes on to say in verse 4, for God is able to make him stand. Listen, God can raise that person up. It's not your job to try and cut them down or to make them feel some certain way. Your only job is to make them feel loved. Our only job is to love one another. That's our only job. So, if you are taking notes, do not judge according to diet. Oh, and days. Let's just go ahead and put that up there because we're about to start that here in verse 5. We're not to judge anyone based on diet We're also not to judge anybody based on days. What about days? Verse 5. One person esteems one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. Now, years ago, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Pastor Chuck Smith from Calvary, Costa Mesa. Anybody here ever heard of Pastor Chuck? Okay, some of you have. Good. It's a good thing. Because he was the one that started the Calvary Chapels. We're Revival Christian Fellowship, but our official, legal name is Calvary Chapel of Menifee. I don't know if you knew that or not. A little bit of trivia there for you, okay? That might be on the test in a couple of weeks. So just keep that in mind. But Pastor Chuck, years ago, I remember him I was listening to one of his cassette tapes. Cassette tapes were these little plastic things. Anyways, I was listening to one of those cassette tapes, and he was talking about somebody that was wanting to argue with him. And they were trying to argue with Pastor Chuck and to tell him that that to have his church meeting on a Sunday was wrong, that it was ungodly. And this individual was saying we need to honor the Sabbath, which would go from Friday night at sundown until Saturday night and sundown. And you should be going to church on Saturday. And Pastor Chuck went on to explain, look, you want to meet on Friday, go for it. You want to meet on Saturday, go for it. You want to meet on Sunday, go for it. Monday, Tuesday. And then he went on to point out that the early church, back in the book of Acts, I don't know how many of you remember this, but they were just meeting every single day. So you have those individuals who are stuck on one day, no, you've got to have this day, this such and such day. And then you have those like us who say, oh, you're going to be there on a Wednesday? All right, I'll go on Wednesday. Oh, you're going on Sunday? I'll go on Sunday. Oh, there's the Friday night home study? Okay, I'll go to the Friday night home study. Oh, you're having an event? Okay, I'll go on that day too. And for us, it's just every day. I mean, you're always being encouraged to do that in here. And I know that when you were with Plaza, he was doing the same thing. And I know before that, when you were with Children's Ministry, he was doing the same thing. That everybody's always encouraging you, hey, you got to live your life with the Lord every day, not just one day. So here in verse 5, that's what he's getting at, that some people, they cherish one day. They esteem one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. It's just every day is the same. Every day is a day with the Lord. Every day is a good day. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. So each individual. So neither one is wrong, Paul is saying. Each individual needs to be convinced in his own mind. And we say, well, which one's right? Yes. Verse 6. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord. So he's dedicated. That individual is dedicated. That's the day I'm giving this to the Lord. And that is not a bad thing. Verse 6. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord. And he who does not observe the day, the one single day, to the Lord, he does not observe it. He who eats to the Lord. For he gives God thanks. And he who does not eat, to the Lord he does not eat, and gives God thanks. In other words, whether you're on whether you claim a special day, or if every day is like a special day, or whether you have this certain diet or you don't have a specific diet, it's all for God. What we're doing is we're living for God. And that's what he goes on to tell us. I love this subject here. Verse 7. For none of us lives to himself. And I think I'm safe to say herself either. For none of us lives to himself, and no one dies to himself. For if we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. It's real simple, you see. We as Christians, man, we can get in arguments, and you will experience this. Some of you have already experienced that. You might have friends at school, and they might be other Christians, and when they find out that you're a Christian, and what you do or you do not do, sometimes they may want to put a trip on you, you're not supposed to be dancing. There are Christians that believe that you should not dance. Now, I'm not seeing you dance. Maybe you shouldn't. But dancing dancing, I suppose, can be sinful, depending on what kind of dancing you're doing. But dancing itself is not a sinful act. But there will be those that you might come across that will say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Or, there are groups of Christians who believe that, I know you've seen them before, that females, ladies, female Christians should always stay covered from basically, from their chin all the way down to their ankles. And you'll see them they'll always have long sleeve garments on, and they will always have long skirts on. They won't wear pants, they'll always have long skirts on. I don't know, anybody ever seen anybody like that? Okay, yeah, so I've seen lots of them over the years. Here's the deal. We're not to look down on those people and say, come on, you can wear pants. What's the big deal? Listen, if they want to wear long skirts, and that's let them. What's the big deal? Just encourage them toward the Lord. Hey, just keep serving the Lord. Keep worshiping the Lord. Now, if they look down on you, which they shouldn't be looking down on you because I can't believe you wear pants. But if they do, our job is to be gracious with those people, not to fight with them, not to argue with them, not to try to prove them wrong. But I love this here, what he's saying in verse 7 and verse 8, and that is this. I love this topic, and I got to be careful not to get stuck here. So let me say something, and then we'll move on. There is a day and a time that in the past where you gave your life to God. Now, as we describe it lots of different ways. You got saved. You gave your life to the Lord. You became a Christian. You were born again. I can't remember the other terms, okay? But at that point, what you did, a lot of Christians do not understand this, so this is why I'm taking the time to share this with you, because people come in for counseling all the time. Older than you, they got saved in high school, junior high, high school, got saved at a camp, and then they spend the next several years essentially fighting with God. Now, they don't know that they're fighting with God, but let me explain to you how this happens. What can happen oftentimes is that an individual can get saved. They get saved, they say, yes, God, I want you to take my life. My life is yours. And then what they do is they begin from that point, and they really did. They're trying to surrender their life to the Lord, but then what they do is they try to make their Christianity and their walk with God happen on their own. Like, oh, okay, they may see other Christians and like, oh, that Christian, they're doing this thing or they're doing that, and so that means I got to do this or I got to do that. Now, some of those things are good to copy. It's like, okay, I got saved. Christians go to church. Okay, I should go to church. This is a good thing. Learn more about the Bible, worship together, and study together. Those are good things. But there are other things that you may not necessarily be called to. Not every Christian should lead worship. Not every Christian should lead a Bible study. Not every Christian should do those things. And if you try to force it, then you may find yourself just frustrated and like, man, I just want to be a super Christian and it's not working out for me. But the problem oftentimes is that we give our life to the Lord and then we act like it's still ours. And we're trying to live it like I'm just going to do this thing for God. That's not the point of Christianity. The point of Christianity is actually to do things with God. So whatever God's doing, let's do that. Okay? Whatever God's involved in, whatever he gives me the opportunity to do, let me just do that. Wherever God's at, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to be doing. So I need to be careful. So I love this in verses 7 and 8. For none of us lives to himself. I don't live for myself anymore. I'm God's. And no one dies to himself. I don't die to myself either. I'm God's. Verse 8. For if we live to the Lord. If I'm living, if I've got breath in me, I'm giving it to God. If we die to the Lord. If I'm going to die, I'm going to do it for the glory of God. I'm going to go in his name. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. Now what does all of this have to do with diet and with days? Verse 9. For to this end Christ died and rose and lived again, that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. In other words, Christ is the one that's in charge of all of us. Verse 10. But why do you judge your brother? Or why do you show contempt for your brother? Now we go, wait a minute, what do you mean judge them? Well, don't answer this out loud. But when I was talking about the group of Christians that where the ladies are all covered up, and what was going through your mind at that time? If it was something like, oh my gosh, those people, they don't know. Well, then what I'm doing is I'm judging my brother or my sister in that case. So I've got to be really, really careful that I'm not judging others. Verse 10, but why do you judge your brother? Or why do you show contempt for your brother? Why would I show hatred toward my brother? Verse 10, for we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Now, a word that you are going to hear in this church every so often, and I know this because Pastor John uses this word every once in a while, is found there in verse 10. It is that word judgment. It is the word bema, B-E-M-A, B-E-M-A, the bema seat of Christ. That's the judgment seat of Christ. That's where we will receive rewards. And here in verse 11, he says this. Oh, rather, at the end of verse 10, for we shall all stand before the judgment. In other words, here's the point. When we get, all of us are going to stand before Jesus to be judged. So it's not my job to judge Michael. And it's also not his job to judge me. We're going to leave that to Jesus. Now, we need to be careful because there are times when you and I need to correct one another. When we know that when we read something in the Bible and we say, hey, you're not supposed to be lying, but I caught you in a lie. You need to stop. There's nothing wrong with that. That's like, okay, I know that. But in this case, whether it has to do with diet or days, maybe it's clothing, those are not things that we need to be judging each other about because we're going to leave those things to Christ. Verse 11, for it is written, he quotes Isaiah chapter 45 here. As I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So God says, hey, I'm going to be the ultimate judge. Everybody's going to bow to me. Nobody's going to escape. He's the ultimate judge. Okay? Verse 12. So then each of us shall give account of himself to God. I'm going to have to answer for what I've done or what I haven't done. Verse 13. Therefore let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. Now, if you, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but in verse 13, look at this in verse 13. Therefore, let us not judge one another. Somebody help me out. What's the next word? That's right, anymore. Verse 13. Therefore, look at verse 13. Therefore, let us not judge one another
anymore.
There it is.
Next word's instead.
Instead. Mine is but rather. Don't judge me, man. Okay. But rather, resolve this. Is that what yours says, Nathan? What does it say?
It says make up your mind, not put any stumbling block. Yeah,
okay.
NIV.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. Resolve this or make up your mind. But I want you to notice in verse 13 that they were judging one another, and so Paul has to tell them, don't judge one another anymore. Stop. Look, let me explain to you a little bit, but most likely here's what was going on. Remember that Paul is writing to the Christians in Rome. In Rome, you had two different types of Christians. Generally there were two types of Christians. They were both saved. But one had, one was a Jew, had practiced Judaism, and then they got saved. And what they did was they took some of their practices and some of their laws and some of like dietary laws or some of their special days, their holidays. They took those with them into their Christian walk, into their new relationship with the Lord. And then you had the other group was the Gentiles. These people were not religious at all prior to, and they were not Jews. They were nothing, or maybe they were some other religion, some other maybe they were just pagans, maybe they were idolaters, whatever it might have been. But what they did was they just went right into Christianity, and to them it's like, well, man, we're just free, like God gave us freedom. But to the Jews, they came in and it was hard for them to let go of some of their old practices. And what Paul is saying is, no matter where you're at, whether you're still holding on to some of those things, it's not a big deal. Bring it with you. You're saved. Or if you weren't a Jew and you're just brand new to Christianity and you're saved, but you don't have any of those special days or special diets, that's all right. You're saved. And neither party should be judging one another. Evidently they were. Verse 13. Therefore let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. So what he's telling them is, listen, man, when you meet up for dinner with Zach Brown, and maybe he's got some kind of special diet where he only eats like he's just like only doing vegetables. I know, hard to believe, impossible. Yeah. Right? I've had lunch with Zach before. He eats meat. Okay, burgers, big burgers. Okay, but let's say that we get together, and I know that he only eats. He's a vegetarian. Because for him, let's say that in his mind, in his heart, he believes that if he eats meat, it's going to be sinful. What I am not supposed to do, what Paul is saying in verse 13, do not put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in your brother's way, is this. I am not to show up like, hey, let's hook up for lunch. You go over and get your salad, Zach. Be right back. I'm going to go get my food. I come back with just like a big old burger or something. Big steak. And it'd probably be the other way around. Yeah. More than likely, I'd be having the salad. Okay, but if I was doing it for religious purposes, what I don't want, or what Zach wouldn't want to do, if he's the one eating the burger and I'm eating the salad for religious purposes, what Zach shouldn't do is he shouldn't show up with his big old burger and like, look at me, I've got freedom, and just like go to town. What he should do is, in that case, I would be the weaker brother. I would have the weaker faith because I think that this food gets me closer to God, which is not true. But what Zach should do in that instance is he should show up with a salad also. And you're like, why would I do that? We're Americans. We make decisions. We just do what we want. We're not doing what anybody, nobody's putting a trip on us. Okay? We do that because, listen to what I'm about to say. Before we are Americans or anything else, we are Christians first. And what we do is we love one another. And we're not trying to trip one another up. You may know Christians, older Christians, and for them, maybe they drink alcohol. They drink wine, they drink something else. Okay? You and I have to be careful that we're not looking at them and judging them. Like I don't drink alcohol, but it's not my job to judge those individuals. So we got to be careful. You may not drink alcohol. Well, I'm sorry. You better not drink alcohol. Okay. But as you get older, that's between you and the Lord. But if you do not, if you hold and you say, no, you know what, no, I'm not going to drink alcohol, I don't want to do that, and you don't, it's not our job to look down on somebody that does. Okay, it's the same type of thing here. Now, let me give you another example. If those Christians that drink alcohol are getting drunk, now we got an issue. Now we got a problem. Because the Bible says, do not be drunk with wine. So we know that, wait a minute, the Bible gives you freedom to drink alcohol, but it doesn't give you freedom to get drunk. And so then we would want to say something, not judgmental, but we want to help them out and love them and say, hey, listen, this is what the Word says right here. You got to stop. Okay? But when people are exercising their freedoms, we got to be careful that we're not judging them. But we also have to be careful that we're not doing things just because, I've got the freedom. I go to Calvary Chapel Menifee and we eat meat, and so too bad, so sad that you only eat salads because go ahead and eat your little wimpy salad, and I'm going to get my burger and I'm going to eat my steak and forget you. We can't do that. This is the reason why I love this so much, because what Paul is saying, you got to think of others. You got to consider the people around you and say, hey, what can I do to edify? He's going to use the word edify later on in the chapter here, but what can I do to edify? That means to build up. What can I do to strengthen this individual, not weaken him or her? I can't be judgmental, but I also don't want to do things purposely just to cause them to stumble, because you don't have the freedom. So we've got to think of others. That's the point here. Think of others. It's tough. It's tough because we want to do what we want to do. But sometimes in certain circles of Christians, that could be damaging. And we don't ever want to damage the body of Christ. We want to love one another, and we want to again edify, build up one another, strengthen the body of Christ. And you and I can do that by being patient, by being loving with people. If it's outright sin and I see it, I got to call it. But if it's something like, well, that's the freedom that they have. They've got the freedom to do that. Maybe some of you young ladies, you might see somebody who's like, oh my gosh, the way she dresses, she calls herself a Christian, but she dresses in, such and such a way. Well, listen, it's okay to maybe talk to her and say, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing. But we can't say you're not a real Christian or you're less of a Christian because of the way you dress. We can't do that. That's not our job. If that individual belongs to God, God can do that. If God doesn't want her wearing, skirts so short, he can do that. He can talk to her. So you and I, what we want to do is we want to be loving toward one another. Okay?